This week, but before we get there, this show will come to an end unless people like you can help us keep creating it. Become a patron at patreon.com/actout and keep supporting independent activist news on the front lines. This week, regulation is the name of the game if you want to hold corporations accountable and keep them in line with the interests of people and planet. Sadly, there's one serious hurdle standing between us and regulation, and it has to do with how much your life is worth. Next up, find a Mayday action near you, and while you're at it, paint and spray your message of change in supervillain coup d'art. But first, here's my 2 cents on $20. Justice is useful when money is useless. Use this useless pieces of paper made with our faith in God we trust. Justice is blind, look away. Hold out your hand, feel your fate in the weight, and if it be light, the gavel will fall, the blade then will sway, the glimmering steel of the lady well paid. No, this isn't justice, but a whore corporate maid. Think Hillary type, a toga that wraps round the festering lies, the all-seeking eyes, and a sick lustful mind that will do all you ask. If the price fit the task, your color, your creed, yes, this twisted greed will dictate the chop or the right to be free. You can put a new face on the dollars you print, but come now, be honest. You really don't think that Tubman's strong face can simply erase the fact that she'll pass between hands of today's plantation class race, and that women will still only make 3/4 of bills ironically laced, with 3/5 of a human still held so in practice by this very union. The irony. How purely sadistic, opportunistic, capitalist twisted to honor the names of the ones you enslaved, the ones who you bought and who paid for small shreds of freedom with blood and with pain. But the dead cannot argue. The state will but wait then to use you, contort you, inform you to stand by these fickle facades, money-bagged gods flanked by freedom and justice that under duress do proclaim we've arrived. Our system is perfect. Your lives are all worth it. The past is at last washed away, reconciled through money. The weight of those crisp and new Tubmans, handed in hope of a fair balanced judgment, yet so, like back in the day, the man with the most fresh and new slaves shall always hold sway. Law books and press will echo his say, yes, here, where justice is useless and money is useful. The black and the poor, the brown and the brave, souls who dared to ask for some more, freedom will find. Staring now eye to eye at the woman who was once a slave, the woman who took and who gave freedom and justice outside of this cave of greed and corruption depraved. No, the courtroom is not where the story of justice takes place. From bankers to killers, toxic sludge drillers, this way is filled with the injustice made in money's high name, in gold's hellish grace, in the face of justice. In the face of this woman, you dare now to say that the scales now are balanced with more black men caged than were ever enslaved. When poor women marked as the whores of this age for wanting a say, finally a say, and what our own bodies will do or create when desperate, tired, and poor these immigrants seek a new life, and what for? For powers like ours that itch to wage war, for drugs and for oil like gods, you must love us or suffer our wrath. Yes, when they do come from our own scorched earth path, the sword of that corporate court tears through their home. Mothers and children sliced and alone, prisons for profit, starving and hopeless, and you have the nerve to hold out a 20 and say, justice is served. On this irony's day, a slave market opens, ready for trade. Justice stands, tired but strong, waiting for some brave dissenters to storm that political stage and bring her home, free at last. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. So last week, we brought you special coverage from the weeks-long, thousands-strong movement to raise the people's voice above the din of moneyed interests and corruption in D.C. excuse me, one of the goals of this week of action was to push for 4 bills that I don't have time to go into detail on right now, but that encompass both voting access and rights, as well as the issue of money in politics vis-a-vis Citizens United, corporate personhood, dark money, etc. Now, these 4 bills were by no means the whole point of the actions last week, and indeed, it is not enough to pull us out of an oligarchical quagmire. Just as movements like the Fight for 15 movement must also be accompanied by changes like fair and honest taxes on the wealthy and multinational corporations, plus a restructuring of budget priorities like rent control, access to healthcare, education, and so on and so forth. These 4 bills are but a portion of the fight against corporatocratic control in this country and indeed worldwide. Another piece of that puzzle is regulation. What if regulation was in place to force big banks to avoid horrendously high-risk trading with our money in futures? And what if regulation was in place that forced Monsanto to run extensive third-party tests proving that their frankenfoods were safe for human consumption? What if strong regulation was in place stating that big oil and gas had to prove that their actions wouldn't harm people or planet? Well, just last week, a public citizen press release pointed out that since the BP oil spill that devastated the Gulf of Mexico, cost taxpayers millions and let BP go with barely a wrist slap. In the 6 years since the disaster, the government has enacted just 2 new drilling regulations. One in 2010 on well casings and one in 2012 on the cementing of wells. Today's rule is the 3rd. Meanwhile, disasters are still occurring. The Black Elk Energy rig ignited in 2012, killing 4. A natural gas well blowout in 2013 leaked gas into the Gulf of Mexico for 2 days. The press release goes on to cite extreme lack of government regulation and oversight fueled, if you will, by a congressional push to avoid regulation in favor of big business. I wonder why. They wouldn't by chance have the backing of corporate donors to sway their opinion on common sense regulation, would they? No, I mean, that would be fucking undemocratic. There are many sides to come at the beast of money in politics, but the fight for regulation is undoubtedly an important one. The aforementioned public citizen works on this front, among others, and Amit Narang is their resident expert on regulatory affairs. A few weeks ago, we sat down to discuss one of the biggest obstacles in the fight for common sense regulation, the cost-benefit analysis. And no, that does not sound sexy, but this little fucker deserves far more attention than it gets. And here's why.
Determining the value of a life in this way is far much more an art rather than a science, and there are really big limitations into how precisely we can determine what the value of a life is. There is a wide variance between what some public health and safety agencies use when determining the value of life. It can range from $10 million at the very top end of the scale used by agencies like the Department of Transportation when it comes to auto safety regulations. It could go as low as $3.5 million per life saved. And that's used by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission when it comes to saving safeguards to prevent nuclear catastrophes that would kill lives, of course. I think that variance is basically, in a nutshell, why we shouldn't really place too much emphasis, too much credibility in cost-benefit analysis and the outcomes that we get in cost-benefit analysis.
Right, and in particular, this wide spectrum from 3.5 to 10 million. If I understand it, part of that is, the way that they get these numbers is they survey people and how much money would you be willing to spend. But with the issue of growing income inequality, I would love to spend $1 million to avoid getting my leg chopped off. But at this point in time, I could probably only spend $1,000. So how does this? So does the value of a human life basically, is that contingent upon the economy?
It can be. So you're bringing up a really good point, which is that the willingness essentially all of the benefit side of how regulations benefit the public, it's essentially an attempt to put market values, to commodify public health and safety protections, right? And so when you put market values on, stuff that is essentially priceless, human health, the value of a human life, it's going to be arbitrary to a certain degree. And what happens is that essentially the best way in which economists can value a human life is to ask folks, how much more risk are you willing to accept in order to put your life at risk? Essentially, if what are you willing to be paid in order to accept an increased risk of dying or of getting an injury because we don't have regulations? This is about as subjective a question as you can possibly ask, and so it's not surprising you get subjective answers, and those answers can depend on an individual's economic standing. And so if an individual thinks that they simply don't have the money to spend on protecting themselves from health and safety risks, then they're going to undervalue the amount that their life is worth, essentially, and the amount of risk, the amount that they're willing to pay to avoid, a risk to their well-being, either physical or even economic. So we use cost-benefit analysis, unfortunately, when it comes to regulating Wall Street. And, some of the same problems apply when it comes to asking individuals how much they value a safe and stable financial system.
And on that same note, I mean, I noticed in some of the information that you sent to me, like you were talking about the financial regulation, quote, rules cost big banks more than they benefit the public. Or, in that same vein, the cost-benefit analysis to decide whether actions to prevent, detect, and respond to rape and sexual abuse in prison are worth it. I mean, talk about these instances that aren't as cut and dry as dying from a lack of seatbelts. Like, how can you even... it sounds very boring to talk about the cost-benefit analysis of regulating Wall Street, but, how do you even put numbers on that?
Well, that's right, and so there are a whole host of areas in which the public should be protected from risk posed by corporate wrongdoing or externalities that are just a function of corporate business models, whether it be Wall Street or big oil and gas or big pharma. It's a very difficult issue for regulators when they have to meet these strict cost-benefit tests that basically assume that all of this is a objective science and that you can easily compare the cost to industry, which frankly are easier to figure out because industry gives those costs. You can easily compare those costs to the benefits of regulating in a particular instance that results in kind of priceless benefits to the public, right? So let me go to your point, what you're talking about when it comes to things like regulating rape. So, for example, trying to deal with the problem of prison rape. Essentially, the benefits of avoiding the benefits of dealing with prison rape is the benefits of avoiding being raped in prison. And literally what it's come down to for regulators looking to put in place these common sense regulations to prevent prison rape is asking folks, hey, how much would you be paid? How much was it worth to you to not be raped? I mean, this permeates all levels of public health and safety regulations.
So the fact that there's very low accountability for everybody from Monsanto to the oil trains and things like that, how does that factor into the cost benefit analysis problem? If a corporation knew that, if we do this, then we're going to get sued for contaminating water or etc. Does the accountability issue, the fact that there's sort of a free-for-all for corporations, does that factor into their willingness or unwillingness to move forward with things that would protect the public?
I think so. I mean, so to the extent that there are not enforceable public health and safety standards, there is certainly the possibility of having an industry space result in a race to the bottom. There are no minimum floor, standards, and so there are going to be companies within an industry sector that have a strong incentive to gain a competitive advantage over others in the sector by ignoring, basic standards, operating standards, manufacturing standards that then result in harms to the public. So that kind of race to the bottom paradigm is a real problem and the natural outcome of unregulated spaces in our economy. We saw it with Wall Street, right? Deregulation led to quote unquote financial innovation. Financial innovation being subprime mortgages, repackaging all this nonsense into stuff that was traded multiple times on Wall Street. This is the kind of race to the bottom that is unavoidable, and that is absolutely the reason why we need bedrock public health and safety protections, and we need strong regulation. I think really what's the problem right now is that you can't walk 5 feet on Capitol Hill without hearing job-killing regulation. It's just ubiquitous and in a very bad way. And so what we need are the public activism around weak regulations. And so the activism around holding regulators accountable to actually protecting the public, I think, is not there. And so you have this imbalance that pushes, in a systemic way, regulation to be weaker than it actually should be and taking longer to come out if it actually even does.
So really, it's sort of repackaging this idea of cost-benefit analysis so that activists understand that even though it doesn't sound like a juicy idea, it's what's standing in. It's one of the main hurdles that stands between us and safer water, safer air, safer food. And as Robert Weissman said, the bigger picture is absent. How do you do cost-benefit analysis on global warming?
That's right.
It constrains the imagination. It really is a constraint in terms of bounding what is given serious consideration. So basically, it's a very narrow lens that doesn't take into consideration anything beyond possibly even the cost of a human life. So, what you're talking about with activism is it's really understanding that this is what is causing the gridlock. It's our inability to look over this sort of seemingly arbitrary conversation of cost-benefit analysis when the simple bottom line is that anything that is destructive to people and planet shouldn't be allowed.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's important for your viewers to understand that the public has basic public health and safety rights. We have a right to clean air. We have a right to clean water. We have a right to a climate that is stable. We have a right to a stable Wall Street that doesn't gamble our money away. We have a right to safe food. We have these rights, and the only way to ensure these rights is to make sure that corporate America abides by those rights, respects those rights, instead of letting corporate America assert their rights in D.C. and have their rights be the ones that end up taking precedence over ours when it comes to government taking action to protect the public. Okay, so this is very much an issue of the public's right to being protected versus corporate America's right to essentially keep their massive profits as massive as ever. I think that's the best way to view this issue. And it's a constant fight, frankly, in order to preserve those rights. So I'll say one more thing about what my boss said, which I totally agree with, of course, and not just because he's my boss. This exposes some of the deep hypocrisy around cost-benefit analysis, because we actually do have a way I mean, it's imperfect, of course, as with any cost-benefit analysis, but we do have a way actually to value the impact of global warming, the negative impact of global warming on our world and on the world population. It's called something called the social cost of carbon. It's a nifty little way that the government has actually reframed cost-benefit analysis to talk about instead of the costs of regulating to industry and to the economy, if you believe industry and and their ridiculous claims about job losses, instead of talking about the costs of regulating, let's talk about the costs of not regulating. Everybody sees it in terms of not regulating Wall Street and the financial crash. Everybody sees it when it comes to global warming, right? Not regulating carbon, not limiting carbon emissions will lead to catastrophic climate change. And businesses already understand the cost of carbon. Yeah. So this is not a principled stance when it comes to supporting cost-benefit analysis. We support cost-benefit analysis when it works out for us, i.e. industry. And we absolutely hate cost-benefit analysis when it talks about issues in which the costs of industry activity way outweigh the benefits to the public.
And that's interesting because it's sort of the same argument with single-payer healthcare. I mean, we as taxpayers and as Americans pay way more money for healthcare because we don't have single-payer healthcare, because we don't have that option. So in reality, you end up spending more money to hold on to these conservative ideals than you would by going a more, dare I say, socialist route. So it seems like it's kind of the same concept.
Well, that's right. And again, I mean, single payer. How do you value a society that is that is much healthier than a society that potentially wouldn't be as healthy under a different healthcare model? And so, trying to impose some kind of economic prism to value that right will always fail, and most of the time will argue in favor of less protective healthcare models, unfortunately.
So then what is you talked about the issue specific to climate science, but what is the alternative then to this cost-benefit analysis and the value of human life?
So that's a great question. The alternative is, we see alternatives out there in other countries, and those are working fairly well in those countries and should be considered in this country as well. One is the precautionary principle. In Europe, when it comes to regulating toxic chemicals, the burden is on industry before allowing that chemical to go on the market to prove that it's safe, i.e. the burden is on industry to prove that the toxic chemical passes a cost-benefit analysis, essentially. That's the type of model I think that we should be looking for. When it comes to Wall Street, why not have these wonderful financial innovations be shown to be so wonderful by the companies that are pushing them, by the big banks that are pushing them, before we experiment with them, with the public, with potentially massive and catastrophic consequences like we've seen.
For more on the public citizen fight for regulation, check out citizen.org. Now, moving on, let's take a look at what's coming up on the front lines. So this Sunday is May 1st, aka Mayday, aka International Workers' Day, aka an important day to commemorate. International Workers' Day traces its roots back to union workers. The people who you can thank for weekends, the 8-hour workday, and the fact that your kids aren't just shoved up chimneys and told to get scrubbing. The little things in life. Can't help me with my cough, though. Unfortunately, since its inception in the late 1880s, the message of this day has been co-opted by everyone from Stalin to the Catholic Church to Muammar Gaddafi. And you might have noticed that here at home, our interest in the well-being of our workers has gone from who gives a shit to kind of giving a shit, right back down to who gives a shit. Whether it be the vehemently misnomered right-to-work bills that smash unions and lower wages, or indeed the simple fight for a livable wage, being called absurd by CEOs who enjoy an almost 400% increase in their salaries over the course of one goddamn year. Needless to say, we could use some more Mayday protests, and while there is no cohesive database for Mayday actions that I know of, an organizing fail, I would like to say, I can tell you how I did find one happening in DC, LA, and New York City. Facebook. I'm certainly not here to tell you how awesome Facebook is, And it obviously won't help you tell you what's happening, particularly if it's something of the more subversive nature that you don't want the NSA to have first dibs on knowing about. But that being said, events like the one happening in Brooklyn, where organizers have planned community building actions, plus a film screening of The Take, a film that chronicles workers in Argentina taking over abandoned factories and turning them into democratic co-ops. Events like these are listed and are important. Building your local community, connecting with people around you under the common interest of fighting for justice and educating each other on these issues is vital for the movement and movements. It represents a first step for many and a refocusing for even more. And the best part of this whole thing is that it took me about 15 seconds to find this event. A quick Facebook search for Mayday DC, and this one showed up. The DC Mayday Parade, complete with an anti-TPP faction because, fuck trade deals that'll slash workers' rights, wages, and safety, among many other ills. I happen to know that there's also an event in LA as well, and I'm sure in many other cities, so go ahead. Facebook that shit. Now, before we wrap up this week, allow me to give you a little insight into a badass event that won't show up in the Facebook search, but that warrants a solid mention. The Secret Society of Supervillain Artists, who we spoke to way back on our 6-month anniversary, episode 26. The SSO-SVA is planning a global coup d'art on May 1st, worldwide. This visual display of angst will take place wherever you are, with whatever tools you use to paint or spray fuck the system in whatever iteration that may take. As Silent Bill, the ever-elusive founder of SSO-SVA, told me, simply do some art that has some social relevance, homelessness, sociopolitical, NHS cuts, poverty, environmental, etc., and tag us in it. Hey presto, coup d'art. To get the artistic wheel spinning, here are a few images that Bill sent along as examples. So whether you're planning on spraying, taking in a documentary, protesting, or if I might suggest, all of the above, fuck corporate power and have a powerful Mayday. In the meantime, please spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people you don't know. As usual, check out the last slide to see the sites that I mentioned in this week's show. And be sure to follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. From a slightly sick activist in the Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, donate at Occupy.com/donate. If you'd like to donate directly to Act Out, visit Patreon.com/actout.